There is an interesting Chinese word that did not seem to exist before the 5th century. The word is 面首. It means a male favorite kept by a woman of power, a beautiful man kept for company and pleasure, in a way that emperors kept concubines. Now, the concept of a male favorite definitely goes further back in Chinese history, but there wasn't a unified term to describe them until this moment. This word entered the Chinese language because one woman asked for something no woman in her position had ever thought to ask for out loud. And a man with the power to give it to her said yes without hesitating. That woman was Liu Chuyu, the Princess Shanyin. Princess Shanyin is remembered today as a princess who requested a harem of 30 male favorites, famously arguing that it was unfair that a man could have many concubines, but she could only have one husband. She was criticized by many historians for being inappropriately promiscuous and for disregarding moral and social standards. She was used as a popular cautionary tale for future women, as an example of how not to behave. But of course, none of these historians criticized men for having many concubines in the same way. Hey everyone, and welcome to Tea with Amy. Today, let's talk about the story of Princess Shanyin. Was she really as immoral as the history say? Or was she simply asking for the same freedoms as the men around her? Princess Shanyin was born around 446 CE, the eldest daughter of Emperor Xiaowu and Empress Wang Xianyuan of the Liu Song Dynasty. The Liu Song Dynasty was one of the major dynasties that formed during a period of fragmented China, at the beginning of what we know today as the Southern and Northern Dynasties. This was over 500 years before the Song Dynasty that most of us are more familiar with today. The Liu Song Dynasty had inherited its territory, its capital, and its culture from the preceding Eastern Qing Dynasty. And that culture inheritance matters, because the Eastern Qing was one of the strangest and most fascinating courts in Chinese history. It was a world where the noble families had developed a philosophy of living that valued being true to yourself over correctness, beauty over obedience, and individual expression over conformity to social rules. The scholars and nobles of that period wore their robes loose and open. They drank wine and composed poetry, and refused to perform Confucian deference if they found it insincere. They said that a truly cultivated person expressed their genuine nature without apology. They said that beauty in a person's face and bearing was the outward sign of inner character. The Liu Song Dynasty kept all of that. But unfortunately, while that freedom of spirit may sound wonderful, it was probably not the best for governance. It reinforced the idea that the powerful were not bound by the same rules as everyone else. It added a political culture that had been built on violence from the beginning, where the throne changed hands through killing as often as through inheritance. Power moved fast here, and it turned on people fast. Brothers killed brothers for the throne. Sons arranged for inconvenient fathers to die at convenient times. The men who lasted long enough to rule were the ones who had learned early that sentiment was a liability. This combination of take what you want, be authentic, and let nothing constrain you created a unique world that would define every moment of Princess Shanyin's life. In fact, her father, Emperor Xiaowu, had come to the throne by killing his own elder brother, a perfect example of the kind of behavior that defined this time period. As a ruler, though, he was capable enough in his earlier years, reforming institutions and managing the noble families. But according to later accounts, Emperor Xiaowu was a sex addict. He wanted women, all kinds of women, the wives and daughters of ministers, young women from within his own extended family, palace maids from the Empress Dowager's quarters. He would walk into his mother's palace, see someone he wanted, and take her back to his own chambers. If she resisted, she died. There were even rumors that he had an inappropriate relationship with his own mother, with him spending hours with her in her private bedchambers. And he had 4 cousins, daughters of his uncle, Prince Liu Yishun, who were said to be beautiful. When they came to the palace for a formal visit, he kept them. They simply did not go home. Not long after, Liu Yishen raised a rebellion against the emperor. The rebellion may have been due to politics, but some stories suggest that it was for his daughters. Unfortunately, he lost, and he and his sons were all executed. Nobody said anything about it after that. None of this was truly hidden. It happened in plain view of the court, and the court adjusted around it, the way it always does when the person at the top has decided that the rules governing everyone else do not apply to him. Growing up in that kind of household, it would have been almost impossible not to absorb what power looked like when fully expressed. It is said that Princess Shanyin was brought to places where daughters were not usually brought. The emperor let her sit near the center of things and watched how they worked. She had a front row view of how the real court operated. She watched her father take what he wanted and watched the court arrange its face into an expression that said this was fine. By the time she was old enough to understand what she had been watching, she had already absorbed its central lesson. The rules were for people who did not have enough power to ignore them. She had not yet fully worked out what that meant for her own life. But the lesson was there, and it was waiting. When the time came to arrange Princess Shanying's marriage, her father chose carefully. Emperor Xiaowu chose He Ji, son of He Yan, a senior official of the imperial court. The He family was one of the powerful noble families of the time, the kind of name that opened every door in the capital, Jiankang. He Ji was young, well-connected, and capable. He was also considered one of the most beautiful men in the entire dynasty. He moved through every room the right way, said every word at the right moment. This appeared to be the perfect match. Beautiful girl, beautiful boy, two powerful families, and the emperor personally approved the union. In the beginning, it was not a bad marriage. He Ji was a considerate husband. They appeared to have had genuine affection for each other, and their marriage was pleasant. But Princess Shanyin wanted more than pleasant, and He Ji was too perfect. He was respectful, he was attentive, he did everything right. Always perfect. For most women of any time period, a husband like this would have been everything that could be desired. But for Princess Shanyin, something just didn't sit right. She had grown up watching her father tear through rooms, taking what he wanted without a second thought. In comparison, the perfect and orderly afternoons of life with He Ji felt like clothing made for someone else. And as a husband to an imperial princess, He Ji was a special kind of husband known as a fuma. This meant that he was an imperial son-in-law that deferred to his wife because she outranked him in the imperial structure. And so, the relationship between the princess and her husband was closer to sovereign and subject than like a married couple. But Princess Shanyin wanted something more. Where was the passion? Where was the excitement? How could she express herself freely in a world without color? So she grew bored. She began spending more time at the palace, seeking out her younger brother, the crown prince Liu Ziye, trying to find the energy of life that she couldn't find in her perfect husband. The marriage did not break openly. It simply became a formality that both of them maintained, because dismantling it would have been more complicated than leaving it in place. In 464 CE, Emperor Xiaowu died at 35 years old, likely worn out from years of excess. The throne passed to the crown prince Liu Ziye, who was just around 15 years old. He would be named in history as Emperor Qianfei, which basically translates to former deposed emperor, a testament to his failure as a ruler. Princess Shanying's father had already shown her how her world worked. Her brother was about to take it even further. and he was going to bring her along for all of it. From the very first days, the court could see what kind of reign it was going to be. The now Empress Dowager Wang Xianyuan fell seriously ill shortly after Emperor Xiaowu's death, and sent repeatedly for the new emperor to come to her bedside. Liu Ziye sent back word that sick rooms were full of ghosts, and he could not possibly go. She was so enraged that her last words were a demand for a knife, so she could cut open her own stomach and find out how she could produce such a son. And then she died without seeing him. While Emperor Xiaowu was still alive, there had still been some limits. Not good ones, but limits. Now there were none. The new emperor had spent most of his life being told that he was not good enough by his father. And finally, he could do anything that he wanted to. He had court officials executed on suspicions alone, removing anyone he feared might threaten him. Liu Ziye had no interest in governing. He was interested in everything else. He ordered palace maids to work undressed and beat to death those who refused. He assaulted the wives and daughters of court officials and noble families. He gathered his consorts and imperial princesses before him and ordered his attendants to violate them. One woman, Lady Jiang, was the wife of his uncle Liu Shuo, the prince of Nanping. She refused to participate and resisted. Liu Ziye responded by executing her 3 sons and had her whipped 100 times. He even seized his own aunt, Princess Xingcai, and detained her in the palace. When Princess Xingcai's husband, the general He Mai, came looking for her, Liu Ziye sent back the body of a palace maid, claiming that the princess had suddenly died. He Mai looked at the corpse and found a stranger's face. He raised a rebellion, and Liu Ziye had him executed. He imprisoned several uncles in the palace and had them beaten on a regular schedule. 3 of them were overweight, which he found amusing. He put them in bamboo cages and weighed them. It turned out his uncle Liu Yu was the heaviest, and Liu Ziye named him the Pig Prince. Liu Ziye had the Pig Prince Liu Yu thrown into a pit of mud and forced him to eat on his hands and knees from a wooden trough. On one occasion, Liu Ziye had Liu Yu tied to a carrying pole like livestock and paraded him into the palace kitchens, announcing that he was going to kill a pig that day, but he didn't actually do it. Liu Ziye also had a habit of visiting the ancestral temple to offer commentary about his ancestors. He praised his great-grandfather, the founding Emperor Wu, for capturing several enemy emperors in battle. He noted that his grandfather, Emperor Wen, was not bad, but lamented that it was a pity that he was killed by his own son. One time, he pointed at a portrait of his own father, Emperor Xiaowu, and complained that the painting was missing his father's giant nose, and immediately demanded the mistake to be corrected. Liu Ziye then wanted to dig up his father's tomb in order to insult him further, but was stopped by court officials. Instead, he sent men to pour manure into the tomb, calling his father a big-nosed slave. But that wasn't enough. Liu Ziye's heart was still filled with resentment, and he needed to do more. Since it was bad luck to desecrate his own father's tomb, he went for the next best thing instead. He ordered his men to raid the tomb of Consort Ying, his father's favorite concubine. Her remains were dragged out of the tomb and left exposed to the sun. Shortly after this desecration, Liu Ziye ordered the execution of Consort Ying's 10-year-old son, Liu Ziluan. Right before his death, Liu Ziluan cried and said, "I pray that in my next life, I would not be born again into an imperial family." There were definitely whispers of removing him. His grand-uncle, Liu Yigong, who was the prince of Jiangxia, along with senior officials, discussed replacing him with another ruler. But Liu Ziye found out. He led the imperial guards to Liu Yigong's residence and had him killed. The body was mutilated, his eyes gouged out, and preserved in honey as a grotesque warning to others. Liu Ziye was, by all accounts, completely unhinged. But to his sister, the Princess Shanyin, Liu Ziye was a completely different person. He elevated her title to Grand Princess of Kuaiji, and they were seen everywhere together. He brought her with him when he traveled, seated her beside him in the imperial carriage, and brought her into the center of the imperial court. They ate from the same table, even feeding each other. He listened to her in a way he listened to almost no one else. The court watched and said nothing, because what could they say? The relationship between them had long since moved past what anyone could properly describe, and everyone had learned to stop trying. She had an influence inside that palace that carried no formal title, but everyone around her could feel it. And one day, she used it. She said, "Your Majesty and I may be different in gender, but we're both the flesh and blood of our late father. You have thousands of beauties in your harem, while I am left with but a single husband. How can things be so unequal?" It seemed that her argument made sense to Liu Ziye. He did not argue. Instead, he assembled 30 young men, selected specifically for their appearance, and sent them to his sister's residence. He gave them a name, 面首, the character 面 for beautiful face, and 首 for magnificent hair. This was the first time that this term was used in recorded Chinese history, and would become the proper term to refer to male consorts going forward. Liu Ziye also greatly elevated Princess Shanyin's status, increasing her stipend, granting her control over 2,000 households, and imperial ceremonial staff. If she was going to live like an emperor, he would give her the household to match. What about her husband He Ji, though? Imagine what that day must have been like for him. Standing in his own home, watching 30 young, beautiful men delivered to his wife by imperial decree, knowing that any objection was not merely futile, but almost certainly fatal. He said nothing. He found a way to go on living inside that silence. It was the only option available to him. Princess Shanyin accepted all 30 of her new 面首. She settled them in her household and organized her new life with the same energy she brought to getting what she wanted. She had asked for something no woman in her position had ever asked for, and she had gotten it. For a while, that was enough. But while exciting at first, having 30 面首 quickly turned out to be not so different from just having one perfect husband. Every single one of them looked at her the same way, with the careful, performed attention of someone whose comfort depends entirely on pleasing her. They would do whatever she asked. They would say whatever she wanted to hear. There was no one in that household who could afford to be honest with her. None of them dared to do anything that would have made life more interesting for the princess. She had filled her life with people who needed her, and found that it felt exactly as empty as before. The 30 men filled the rooms, but they didn't fill whatever she had actually been looking for. She needed something else. And then she heard a name. Word of the 30 面首 had spread fast through the capital Jiankang, the way this kind of story always does. It moved from the court to the wine houses to the tea houses and back, picking up details at every stop. And somewhere along the way, the story had acquired a challenge. There was one man in the empire, people said, who was completely beyond the princess's reach. The most beautiful man. His name was Chu Yuan. He was a court official with a civil administration role. But nobody cared about his job or his title. What everyone talked about was his face. Even grown men would stop and stare when seeing his face. For a period, men across the capital practiced copying his expressions and demeanor. Being like Chu Yuan had become a social fashion, and beyond his appearance, Chu Yuan was a man of genuine integrity. A beautiful man with integrity, He was possibly more perfect than Princess Shanying's husband, He Ji. And even more ironic, it turns out that Chu Yuan was the very man that He Ji had been modeling himself after. The perfect husband that Princess Shanyin had grown bored of had been trying to become more like the men that she now couldn't stop thinking about. But beyond the irony, there was just one little challenge. Chu Yuan was already married to the Princess Nanjun, which technically made him Princess Shanying's uncle by marriage. For Princess Shanyin, it was truly just a small hurdle. She went to her emperor brother. Could he arrange for Chu Yuan to visit? Liu Ziye knew Chu Yuan well enough to know that asking directly wouldn't work. So he issued an imperial edict, ordering Chu Yuan to take up residence at the western upper pavilion within the imperial palace for 10 days. The official reason was for literary conversation. The actual reason was obvious. He had delivered the man as close to her door as he could. The rest was up to her. Chu Yuan had no choice but to comply. He arrived on time, he was composed, and he behaved exactly as the edict demanded. Nothing more, nothing less. Every day, Princess Shanyin came to him. Every day, the moment she drew near, he rose to his feet and stood, still, upright, unreachable. She tried everything, translucent silk, less than that, and even less than that. When she finally reached for him directly, he took her hand and held it away without raising his voice or changing his expression. She challenged him. You appear to be fierce and imposing, but why is it that you do not behave like a man? He answered, Though I am not a great man, how could I dare be the first step into disorder? When she threatened to use force, he told her he would die first. Not dramatically, just as a fact. 10 days passed, and she let him go. She had demanded the world, and her brother had given it to her. But in the silence of the western upper pavilion, Chu Yuan had shown her that there was at least one thing that she wanted that she could never own. As Princess Shanyin's life continued at its usual pace, the court around her was quietly coming apart at the seams. The pig prince, Liu Yu, was still in the mud, and he endured everything with a face that showed nothing. He had spent his time in captivity, learning which guards had grievances deep enough to be reached, and which ones had stopped imagining a future inside this empire. He even converted some of Liu Ziye's most trusted guards. Among the men Liu Yu reached was one of the emperor's closest attendants, a wardrobe master named Shou Ji. He knew every corridor of the palace and every shadow where a man could wait unseen. The men who had been forced to eat from a trough on his hands and knees had endured it the way someone endures something they know is temporary. He was waiting for the right moment. Liu Yu's people needed to get Liu Ziye somewhere small, somewhere with few guards, somewhere away from the protection of the full imperial court. And then Liu Yu's moment came. He found their opening in the emperor's superstitions. Liu Ziye had been having nightmares. Which made sense. He had killed enough people by this point that the ones who visited him in his sleep had plenty of company. He dreamed of a wronged woman, maybe one of the palace maids that he had killed. Was the palace haunted? Maybe the dead were coming back. For others, this may have been a moment of reflection, a time of reckoning. But Liu Ziye's response to guilt was action. If there were ghosts, he would kill the ghosts. Then word got to him that there were ghosts in the Hualing Garden, a large imperial garden complex inside the palace grounds. Liu Ziye, superstitious and already troubled by bad dreams, took the bait. That night, he went to the bamboo grove hall within the garden to shoot the ghosts with arrows. He brought a small party. He brought his sister, Princess Shanyin. The hall was full of torchlight and filled with incense smoke. Hidden within the haze was Shou Ji, along with armed men, waiting in the darkness, posing as ghosts. Liu Ziye saw the ghosts. He shot an arrow, but he missed. The ghosts were carrying real blades. They came at him. He ran, but he was caught, and Shou Jizhi cut him down. On the night of January 1st, 466 CE, Liu Ziye died in the Bamboo Grove Hall. He was around 17 years old and had been emperor for 1 year and 2 months. Princess Shanyin got out in the chaos. She moved through streets that were still trying to understand what had just happened, where the news was spreading block by block. The sound of the city was changing. The power of the empire was shifting. She made it back to her residence before dawn. She had survived the night. She was home. She thought there was still time, but there was not very much time at all. The pig prince Liu Yu walked into the palace having lost a shoe somewhere in the chaos. His clothing was still in disarray. There had been no time to prepare imperial attire. And then he sat on the throne. One moment he was eating from a trough. Now he was emperor. He became Emperor Ming of the Liu Song Dynasty. He was 41 years old, and he was not in a forgiving mood. The imperial edict came the following day. The Grand Princess Liu Chuyu has abandoned herself to depravity and wickedness, and has completely violated the principle of the human moral order. And this is how history would remember Princess Shanyin: promiscuous, depraved, and beyond the bounds of acceptable morality. The edict arrived in the morning. Princess Shanyin was condemned and ordered to die at home. She was granted death in the form of white silk. And when you were granted the white silk by the emperor, you had to use it. She was not yet 20 years old, and it is said that her 30 mianshou were killed alongside her. But her husband, He Ji, was not punished and walked away. He went on to serve in several official posts and eventually remarried. And with his new wife, he raised a daughter named He Jingyin. He died at 36, and later histories remembered him as a good man. He Jingyin would grow up to marry Xiao Zhaoye, the prince of Nanjun. He was said to be composed and dutiful at first, but quickly revealed himself to be reckless and indulgent. And He Jingyin turned out to be no better, as she is remembered for engaging in multiple adulterous affairs. This is often pointed to as a small echo of Princess Shanyin in her husband's daughter. But was it really related to Princess Shanyin? When the Liu Song Dynasty collapsed in 479 CE, the Xiao family would rise up to form the new Southern Qi Dynasty. Xiao Zhaoye would then briefly become emperor of the Southern Qi Dynasty in 493 CE, making He Jingyin his empress. But he quickly showed no interest in governance, choosing instead to feast, enjoy music, and burn through the empire's money. As was customary of the times, Xiao Zhaoye would be deposed and killed just a year after becoming emperor. He Jingyin was stripped of her title and disappeared from the rest of history. And so, the cycle of chaos in the Southern and Northern Dynasties continued. While Princess Shanyin was heavily criticized in historical records and remembered today as an example of a terrible woman in Chinese history, there is perhaps another angle from which we could look at her story. In the 20th century, the famous writer and social critic Bo Yang wrote an essay about Princess Shanyin, praising her for having modern views and for her recognition of the inequality between men and women more than 1,500 years ago. Modern commentary points out that the historians who criticized Princess Shanyin did not criticize her father or her brother in the same way. Sure, they were also remembered as bad people, but it was often framed as a product of the times. But what about Princess Shanyin? How Princess Shanyin lived was also not so different from what the men around her did every day. Princess Shanyin did not invent the way she lived. She learned it. The court of the Liu Song Dynasty had been shaped, over generations, into a place where the powerful simply took what they wanted. Her father had taught her that, and her brother had taken it even further and kept going. If Princess Shanyin did anything wrong, was it entirely her own fault? Or was it a product of the men around her? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Princess Shanyin was great, or that she should be an inspiration to any of us. But I think it is worth thinking about Princess Shanyin's story in a context of the world she lived in. What do you think? Let me know in a comment. If you enjoyed today's topic, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.